The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled 2021 Participation in the Quality Payment Program. Today's presenter is Bruce Mackey, Alterum's Regulatory and Incentive Program Analyst. My name is Liz Jones, and I am today's moderator. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to touch on. A PDF copy of today's slides can be downloaded right now from your GoToWebinar interface. We will be keeping everyone muted during today's presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the questions box in your GoToWebinar interface, and we will address it during the Q&A. Because of the large number of attendees for today's webinar, we may not have time to answer all of the questions. If we do not address yours during today's broadcast, you will receive an answer through email. Also, a link to the recording of this presentation will be available soon on the events page of our website at www.qppresourcecenter.org/events. Today, Bruce will review the 2021 participation rules of the Quality Payment Program, providing general program education, as well as reviewing the notable changes in this fifth performance year. He will discuss the participation timeline, eligibility requirements and various reporting options, notable updates to each of the 4 performance categories, as well as changes to the 2021 performance threshold and subsequent payment adjustments. From there, he'll finish with an overview of the alternative payment models track and its effect on your program participation. Following the presentation, with any time remaining, Bruce will answer any questions posed by the attendees. Please note, the information you will hear in this broadcast is current as of today and is only intended to be a general summary. With that, I will turn things over to Bruce.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everyone for joining us today to review the 2021 rules for the Quality Payment Program. As you can see, we have a fairly packed agenda, and any of you that have attended my webinars in the past know that I generally run out of time. I have so much information that I like to share and so much that I want to share and know that you need to know. As usual, I have way too much content packed into these slides than I can really cover in the time we have allotted today. So know that some of the slides I will kind of glaze over and just you have them as reference. I highly recommend grabbing the PDF of these slides from the handout section of your GoToWebinar interface. There are, one, to access those slides that I'm going to kind of glaze over and not really talk about, but 2, there are a lot of links that I've built into the slides too to kind of help you along and get you to some key resources. So with that, let's dive in. So we're here talking about the Quality Payment Program, or the QPP. And within the QPP, we have these 2 tracks of participation. We've got the MIPS track, otherwise known as the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, and then the Advanced APMs track. There's really almost a 3rd track that I like to call out, and that is those of you that are participating in what is known as a MIPS APM. It sort of bridges the gap between the MIPS track and the Advanced APM track. You've got some of the benefits being in that APM, but you are still required to participate in the MIPS track. And so it's almost like this 3rd track that we have. And I'll touch on really all 3 of these tracks as we get through all of these slides. There's that, I want to call your attention to the website that's at the bottom of this slide, the qpp.cms.gov. That is CMS's main website for all things QPP, including manual data submission. There is a wealth of information and a lot of great resources included in that website. So if you're not already familiar, you're going to want to check that out as well. So what is MIPS? It's the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. For those of you that have been participating in this for a few years, you're well versed in how it took multiple legacy Part B programs and combined them into the single program. MIPS gives us 4 separate performance categories, and if you are fully participating, you're contributing data or being scored across all 4 of these categories: quality, cost, promoting interoperability, and improvement activities. So each of those categories contribute a certain weight to the MIPS final score. The best MIPS final score you can get is a full 100, and you can see how the weighting has changed from last year to this year. We continue to see some changes to the quality and cost weighting. This year in 2021, the quality category is now worth 40 points or 40% of that score. Cost is worth 20%. Improving activities and promoting interoperability did not change from last year to this year. So it is, let's see, we've got somebody asking if audio has started yet. So yes, we did start. Can somebody put into the questions, just let me know that you all can hear me right now, other than the one person who just said something. Wait just a second. Okay, great. Sounds like everyone else can hear me. So Tanya, you might look at the GoToWebinar interface. No, not that she can hear me anyway, but you can adjust those settings there. You might be able to pick that up. Anyway, those points earned across all those categories give us that MIPS final score. And then that final score gets compared to the annually set MIPS performance threshold, which is 60 points this year, up from, I think, 50 points last year, to determine if the participant, otherwise known as an eligible clinician, an EC, or the group, receives a positive, negative, or neutral payment adjustment. Here we have the 2021 MIPS timeline. We have, and I like to just kind of reference this. Really, it's just to understand how the payments work, and they're always 2 years later from the performance year. So we're in the 2021 performance year right now. It runs the full calendar year, January 1st to December 31st. Then we have the data submission period will open on January 4th, and you have roughly 3 months to get your data in. CMS then later next year, usually around summertime, will get some feedback, and you'll understand what that payment adjustment is going to be relative to that feedback and what that MIPS final score was. And then it's not till 2 years after that performance year that those payments are adjusted. So we're working today in the 2021 performance year, and that is going to affect your 2023 Medicare payments. All right, so these next few slides are going to really going to show that not a lot changed, or really almost nothing changed at all in terms of the eligibility and the reporting options. So we'll get through some of this stuff just to kind of review first. So first is who is included. We haven't seen any changes to the MIPS eligible clinician types for this year. We haven't seen this change for a few years, actually. So the same folks that have been eligible, the same types of clinicians that were eligible for the past few years are still the same here in 2021. Honestly, I haven't heard anything regarding if that is going to increase, if they're going to pull additional clinicians into this. So right now, this is where we stick. We also have no change to the low volume threshold. So again, it's first you identify who those eligible clinician types are, and then we compare their volume of Medicare claims and whatnot against this low volume threshold. No changes again for the past few years. So there are those same three elements that you have to overcome, all three of these, to have your participation be mandatory in the program. You have to bill more than $90,000 a year in allowed charges under the PFS. You have to furnish covered professional services to more than 200 Medicare beneficiaries, and you have to provide more than 200 covered professional services, otherwise known as claim lines, to those 200 or more Medicare beneficiaries. If you exceed all three of those low volume threshold elements, then you would find your participation to be mandatory. If any one of those is not true for a clinician, then things change a little bit. Their participation could be sort of voluntary, or they can opt in, which I'll touch on in just a moment as well. We've got that link right there in the middle to find the participation lookup tool. You might also find logging in through the main QPP website, qpp.cms.gov. If you log in through the portal there, you can actually see all of your clinicians in one place. You can to look at their eligibility by TIN instead of the one-by-one NPI lookup that that link will take you to. So what happens if a clinician or group is excluded, but they still want to participate? We've had these couple of options now for the past few years, and they remain the same here in 2021. You can voluntarily participate, which means you're still going to submit that data to CMS, and they're going to give you feedback, but it's not going to have any financial adjustments tied to it, regardless of that performance. So that's the voluntary participation. Do note that some of that program data will still be publicly available on Medicare's Care Compare website as well. You can also opt in, and that's a very different option. But again, if you are a MIPS eligible clinician type and you meet or exceed one or two, but not all three of those low volume threshold criteria, you have the option to opt in to MIPS participation. If you choose to opt in instead of voluntarily participating, you'll be subject to the MIPS program rules and the subsequent MIPS payment adjustments relative to that score. Once made, that annual decision can't be reversed. But again, that's owned. So if you opt in, you're not opting in till the end of time. It's just for that one program year. But note that once you opt in, you can't reverse that decision. So make sure that if you're going to opt in, that you've got great scores to do so. You wouldn't opt in to take a penalty. For some additional details on the option, as well as the process for opting in, I've got a link there to the opt-in and voluntary reporting election toolkit. That is a 2020 resource. CMS has not updated that yet for 2021, but just note that the information hasn't changed from last year to this year. Reporting options remain the same as well. You can participate as an individual clinician, you can participate as a group, and then you can also participate as a virtual group. I will note here also that as an individual clinician, CMS sees every NPI and tax ID combination as a separate program participant. So if you have a clinician that bills under more than one tax ID, CMS sees each one of those NPI and tax ID combinations as a separate program participant. You're never going to combine data from multiple tax IDs into a single data submission. So in that way, a single clinician could receive multiple MIPS final scores at each one of those tax IDs and receive a different Medicare reimbursement rate based off those different scores. So this question still comes up as well. Folks want to know, does it make more sense to participate at the individual or the group level? There's no easy answer there. You just have to kind of crunch the numbers and see which makes sense. But do note that it often makes sense to do it both ways, submit as an individual and as a group. The reason for that is that if CMS receives 2 data sets on any one clinician, so they have individual data and they have group level data, CMS is going to award the better of the 2 data sets to that clinician. They're going to score them off the better of those 2. So with that in mind, the best overall strategy then is to always group report, unless of course the group score is below that minimum performance threshold. You would never want to do that because group participation is always voluntary. You do not ever have to group report. So only group report if your group can get over that minimum threshold, which again is 60 points this year. Then if an eligible clinician is eligible to report individually, meaning they exceed that low volume threshold, and his or her individual MIPS score is better than the group average score, also report that clinician's individual data to CMS. So with that strategy, lower performers' scores in the group are raised by the higher group average, and then higher performers are not negatively affected by the lower performers, as CMS will give these ECs their higher individual score instead of that slightly lower group score. All right, let's dive into what actually did change from last year to this year. While there were not a ton of changes, there were some subtle ones that you need to be aware of, and also some fairly significant options that they've opened up as well. One last thing that didn't change is that we are all still being heavily affected by COVID-19. CMS recognizes this, and just like last year, they have already announced that they are keeping the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances exception application available to you to use again for 2021, signaling COVID-19 struggles as that reason why you need to take a pass on 1, 2, 3, or maybe all 4 of those performance categories. So they're giving you that way out. I would suggest not automatically taking that if you don't necessarily have to. But certainly, I know that so many clinicians and so many of their clinics are really, really still struggling with COVID, and you really do need to take that pass on QPP this year. So if you want some more information, I've got a link there to the COVID-19 response fact sheet that will give you some additional information. Just note that the EUC application, while we will be able to use it for 2021, it's not available yet, which is pretty typical for this time of the year. CMS typically gets us that application available sometime around the summer, and then you've got a submission deadline of 12/31 to get that in. So you'll still have 6, 7, maybe even 8 months to get that in. So don't worry yet. They will post that in the coming months. All right, one more thing that didn't change is the MIPS performance period. So each one of those 4 performance categories, you have to submit a certain amount of data that spans a certain amount of time. We haven't seen any changes here for the past several years. Again, not sure that we ever will. We may lock in all of these with these time frames. We'll see. But just note that 2021 is still 12 months of quality data, 12 months of cost data, and then a minimum 90 days for improvement activities, and your promoting interoperability performance period is also a minimum of 90 days. You can always over-report on the for the PI category. You don't have to limit yourself to just those 90 days. Sometimes it makes sense to extend that a little bit more. Maybe it's 100 days, maybe it's 150 days, maybe it's the full 365. You want to pick that reporting period that's going to earn you the best PI score, and it's not always at the 90 days. All right, we're going to dive into the 4 performance categories now. So there is a quick start guide for each one of the performance categories. I have that link here on each one of the slides. The quick start guide for the quality performance category is right there on your screen. It is worth 40% of that MIPS final score, as I mentioned. There are still a ton of quality measures to choose from. So we have over 200 still available to you this year. Beware of changed and or removed measures from prior year, though. While you can certainly use the same quality measures from year to year, sometimes the specifications of those measures change from year to year. So if you are going to repeat the same quality measures you used last year, just make sure that you're aware of any measure changes that may have occurred from 2020 to 2021. You're selecting and reporting on a minimum of 6 individual quality measures. One of them still must be an outcome measure or a high priority measure if the outcome measure is not available. If fewer than 6 measures are clinically relevant, you're going to report on each applicable measure. And if CMS agrees with you, so just be aware, you can't just choose to report on only 3 unless CMS is going to kind of double check you, and they have to agree that only 3 or 4 or whatever you reported on are clinically relevant. There's a process called the EMA process, or eligible measures applicability process, that they're going to run you through. And if they don't agree that you had fewer than 6, you're going to get docked for that. If they do agree with you, your category denominator will be appropriately lowered. In that way, you don't get penalized for reporting fewer than 6. You can also select a specialty-specific measure set. There are tons of specialty measure sets that have been developed, and they keep adding to that from year to year as well. Some of those measure sets already have fewer than 6 measures in them. That is CMS already, passing their own work through the EMA process and determining that those specialties do in fact have fewer than 6 clinically relevant measures. So if your specialty measure set has fewer than 6, you are safe. You can report on just that specialty measure set and whatever number of measures are contained within it if it's fewer than 6. And CMS will automatically lower that denominator because they've already agreed that that specialty didn't have 6 or more clinically relevant measures. Bonus points are still available. Nothing changed here from last year. CMS wants your data. You get incentivized to over-report, and it makes a lot of sense to report on more than 6 measures. You can significantly increase your quality category score that way. So you get 2 additional points for every outcome or for every additional outcome or patient experience measure. After that first one is submitted, you get an additional point for other high priority measures. You get an additional point for each measure that is submitted using what's called end-to-end electronic reporting. So there are several ways that you can get your quality data to CMS. You can claims-based reporting. You can report, your EHR can report for you. You might be working with a registry to report. Some of those options are deemed end-to-end electronic, and really what that comes down to is that there's no manually keying in of that data. It kind of takes the human element out of it. So claims-based reporting does not qualify for that. But if your EHR is reporting on your behalf, that would qualify, since there's no human intervention to get that data to CMS. So each one of those measures submitted electronically gets you an additional point. You also get 6 bonus points for being a small practice. A small practice is defined as 15 or fewer Medicare billing clinicians. If you, CMS already knows whether you are a small practice. So if you are, and when you start to report, if you report even one quality measure, they automatically give you those 6 bonus points as well. But note that you can't, fill your entire quality bucket with bonus points. So they do cap it at an additional 10% of your denominator. Most folks' denominators is 60 points. There is the concept of data completeness that you still need to be aware of. It's otherwise known as cherry picking. This isn't so much of an issue if you are EHR reporting, but this comes into play in claims-based reporting. It also comes into play with some registry reporting, depending on the method that you're using to transfer that data to the registry. So under data completeness, CMS checks to see if you or your group have submitted data on a minimum percentage of the patients that meet a reported quality measures denominator. So you have to report on at least 70% of your patients to which that quality measure applies. If you drop below that, then you fail data completeness, and regardless of what that performance is on the measure, you're going to earn 0 points if you're a large practice, or 3 points if you are a small practice for failing that data completeness threshold. Some quality performance category considerations you want to keep in mind. You want to pick clinically relevant measures if you can. I know that that's not always possible, especially when you get into some of the specialties. While there are tons of measures available, they don't all apply to folks so well. But you want to pick measures that are important to you and are aligned with your practice goals. If you are struggling to find clinically relevant measures in the main list, the 200 plus measures, the number of measures is actually larger than that. When you start to work with registries, the registries can create and use their own measures. So they create a quality measure that's applicable to their specialty, and then they work with CMS to get that approved to be used within MIPS. CMS approves that measure, says, hey, yeah, that's a great measure. We can see the value in that. It applies well to your clinical specialty. We're going to go ahead and approve that. That registry can then submit that data on your behalf, and it opens up the scope of measures that you have available. So it's really good. We find that being a great option for specialists. So low quality measure performance could be caused by a few different things, some of which are not really in your control, others that are. So you can't necessarily just look at the data that's coming out of your EHR dashboard and say, hey, we've got a quality issue. While they're happening less and less, the EHRs are getting better and better at this. Some of them still do have programming issues. So your vendor doesn't have that measure programmed correctly, and therefore you're getting bad data. You could also have configuration issues. Not all of these quality measures work right out of the box. Sometimes they require some sort of practice level configuration to make sure that it is calculating correctly, such as linking LOINC codes behind the scenes. To err is human. While we all have the best of intentions with using our EHRs in the right way, they're extraordinarily complex, and it's really easy to forget to cross a T or dot an I. And you might miss out on that numerator credit because you didn't document it correctly. So it's only after you kind of work through all 3 of those potential issues that you could actually start to address the actual quote unquote quality issues. Data submission types also matter tremendously under the quality performance category, and I'll touch on why on the next slide. But again, it really relates back to those different submission methods. There is cost associated with some of those submission methods. Claims-based reporting doesn't cost you anything, but working with a registry certainly would. Having your EHR report on your behalf will probably cost you. So you want to consider that. And really the big difference there in terms of quality performance category scoring comes with the different benchmarks. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. You also want to try and avoid topped-out measures and topped-out capped at 7 points measures. So a topped-out measure is one where really there's very little difference in the highest and lowest performers in that particular measure. Over time, everybody gets better and better and better on these measures, and so it creates this issue of being topped out. CMS will eventually remove topped out measures from the landscape of options, but there are issues with using those topped out measures because it becomes very, very, very difficult to get the full 10 points for those. Because again, there's not enough difference between the highest and lowest performers. And then some of those measures get capped at 7 points, meaning they've been so significantly topped out that CMS is no longer allowing you to earn the full 10 points for that measure. Perfect performance would only earn you 7 points instead. So again, you want to try and avoid those if you can. Each year it gets harder and harder to avoid those topped out measures because everybody is doing better from year to year on their performance. So this slide, while I know it's very busy, it's got a lot of numbers, this really gets at that difference in submission methods and what that could potentially do to your quality category score. So if you can follow along here, it's somewhat color-coded. We've got a fictitious clinician here who got a 62 for a performance rate on this particular measure, the preventative care and screening influenza immunization, measure ID 110. These are old benchmarks. I haven't updated this slide because it's really the concept that I want you to be aware of. So don't really pay attention to these. These benchmarks are several years old and they change every year. But if we can follow along, we can see that this clinician, if he uses claims-based reporting, there's the math formula to figure out what a performance rate of 62 translates in terms of points. So we can follow it along here. If they claims-based reported, that performance rate of 62 puts them in decile 5, meaning they're going to earn somewhere in the range of 5 points. If you do the math, it comes out to 5.96 points. If we do EHR-based reporting, exact same quality of care. Nothing has changed there at all. You still get that 62, but you have instead used your EHR to report that data to CMS. CMS calculates different benchmarks for every submission method because the data that comes in via those submission methods is vastly different. So if you report it through your EHR, a performance rate of 62 actually gets you into decile 8, and you'd earn 8.9 points for that measure for doing nothing more than getting that data to CMS by a different route. And then in this example, registry reporting gets you somewhere in the middle there. So it puts you into decile 6 instead and awards you 6.64 points. So you can see that big difference between the 8.9 and the 5.96 here. Multiply that 6 times over, and you can see how just changing that submission method could have a vastly large different effect on that quality category score. So you want to keep that in mind. And if you have the option to choose your submission method, not everybody does, but if you have that option, you want to choose the option that's going to earn you the better quality category score. Here we talk about those topped out measures again and avoiding them if you can. This is getting, as I said, more and more difficult as the years progress. Many measures are topped out, but they haven't yet been capped at 7 points. If they remain topped out for a number of years, they will also get capped. These are screenshots from the 2021 quality benchmarks file that I have right down here. It is a zip file, just be aware. Some systems may reject the download of a zip file. If you can grab that, you're going to see all of this data, all of the benchmarks for 2021 across all of the quality measures. Over here on the right-hand side of that spreadsheet, it gives you that information on whether they're topped out and whether they're capped at 7 points. So we have a lot of them that are topped out but not capped at 7. And as you can see, this is where we start to have that problem, and why it's good to avoid those topped-out measures. If you have absolute perfect performance, you're going to get those 10 points. But you can see here, we've missed out on the ability to get 7 points, 8 points, or 9 points on this particular quality measure through claims-based reporting. One small issue dropping you out of that 100%. So now you're at 99.99% performance, which is still extraordinary, but it's going to drop you all the way from 10 points down to 6 points. So we start to lose out on some of these upper deciles where perfect performance is needed to get those 10 points. And one slight issue will drop you significantly down to that lower level. It gets a little bit muddier than that, unfortunately. We have measures also that are approaching topped out status, but for some reason CMS has not yet deemed it as being topped out. So here's a few examples where they're not topped out, so therefore not capped at 7, but you can see we're already missing quite a few deciles here. So in essence, they're acting like a topped out measure, because on these, even though they're not yet marked as topped out in 2021, still that not hitting that perfect performance is going to significantly hurt you. I suspect, certainly this one, I'd be shocked if this one didn't get marked as topped out next year, because we're clearly in a topped out status where, one tiny mistake or issue is going to drop you all the way down to 3.9 points here with a near perfect but not quite performance score. All right, we'll move into the cost category. It is worth 20% of that final score. Just note that that is going to be 30% next year. That is mandated as part of MACRA, which is the congressional rule that brought us the quality payment program. It was built right into that the quality and cost categories have to be at 30% each by 2022. So next year, I am certain that quality will be worth 30%, and then cost is also going to increase up to 30%. There's no reporting requirement. The data is pulled off those administrative claims. There are 20 measures that you could be scored on, although nobody is going to be scored on all 20 of them. Because of those 18 episode-based measures that span a pretty wide range of specialties. So we've got the Medicare spending per beneficiary, clinician measure, the total per capita cost measure. There are 18 episode-based measures. And while there were no new measures added for this year, some of the specifications changed within them. Some of them have changed how they address telehealth as part of the pandemic with COVID-19. So they've tried to pull in telehealth where they could and having that count on some of those measures as well. So just be aware that specifications changed. So in order to be scored on any one or more of those cost measures, the participant must have enough attributed cases to meet or exceed that case minimum for that particular cost measure. Each one of those has a case minimum built into it. If one or more measures apply out of the 20 options, the ones that apply will constitute the total cost category score for that clinician or group. If none of the cost category measures apply to the clinician or the group, that 20% category weight will be automatically reallocated to the quality performance category, making cost worth 0% and quality worth 60%. So that will happen automatically, and we do still see that happening quite a bit, where none of those 20 cost measures apply. This is one of the slides I'm just going to glaze over. Just gives you a little more information on the two of the quality measures. Here also is a listing of the other 18 episode-based measures. Again, I'm not going to get into any of those. There's a link at the bottom to the 2021 cost measure information forms. If you want some more information on those 18 episode-based measures, grab that resource. It's going to give you a wealth of information. And there is also additional information across all of the cost measures at the main CMS QPP website that I referenced on the front end of this presentation, the qpp.cms.gov. Before I get to the next two performance categories, I want to talk about something called facility-based scoring. We've had this in place now for a couple of years, and it has been a great option for the hospital-based clinicians. A lot of clinicians do the primary or the bulk of their work in hospitals, and that data gets locked into the hospital's system as opposed to maybe their private practice EHR. That makes reporting on their quality extraordinarily difficult. CMS recognizes the difficulty that comes with these facility-based clinicians, and they gave us this facility-based scoring option. So we'll kind of walk through this a little bit. It allows for certain clinicians, really it's those facility-based ones, to have their quality and cost performance category scores be based on the performance of the hospitals at which they work. And it uses the data from what's called the Hospital Value-Based Purchasing Program, or VBP. It is not applicable, so facility-based scoring is not applicable to clinicians participating in a MIPS APM, such as an ACO. So if you are an ACO member, facility-based scoring is not an option for you. Here we have kind of what it means to be an individual facility-based scoring, what those thresholds are, and if groups can also qualify as a facility-based group, and we've got the qualifications there as well. So attribution, a facility-based clinician, is attributed to the hospital where they provide services to most of their patients, to the bulk of their patients. And then facility-based groups are attributed to the hospital where most facility-based clinicians are attributed. If they're unable to identify a facility with a VBP score to attribute to the clinician's performance, that clinician or group is not eligible for facility-based scoring and would have to participate in MIPS via the regular method. And then some hospitals do not receive a total performance score in a given year. There's a variety of reasons why that might happen. If that happens, CMS would be unable to calculate a facility-based score based on that, because the hospital is not going to get a total performance score. So that while you would be a facility-based clinician, the facility to which you are based would not have the data needed to give you that facility-based scoring. And then as a extra note, given the timing of the VBP data and the scores, you may not discover that your facility can't be scored until it's too late to submit your own practice level data. So I always suggest that you also submit your own quality category data if you can, and don't just fall back on that facility-based scoring, just in case something goes wrong. The reason why it's a good idea to go ahead and submit your own quality category score is similar to what I talked about on the front end of this in terms of eligibility and reporting at the individual and group level, and where CMS will award the better of the two scores. The same thing happens with facility-based scoring. So CMS is automatically going to try and score you as a facility-based clinician if they can, and if you would benefit from it. So if you also submit your own practice level data, CMS is going to score both of those and going to do the same thing. They're going to award you with the better of the two. If the quality and cost score that you are getting as being a facility-based clinician is better than your own data submission, then you're going to get that score. If your own data submission is better than the facility-based score, you're going to get that score instead. Again, there is a facility-based quick start guide link at the bottom of your screen that if you want some more information. All right, improvement activities worth 15% of the MIPS final score. We've got 105 improvement activities that are being used in 2021. This is really the honor system, so you're just attesting yes to the fact that you have completed or had that improvement activity in place for a minimum of 90 continuous days in the calendar year. Each activity is weighted and earns points based off that weight. So a medium weighted improvement activity is worth 10 points, and a high weight activity is worth 20 points. You max out in this category when you earn 40 category points. So those 40 category points would translate into the full 15 points or 15% of your MIPS final score. So that's your target. You want to make sure that you're earning those full 40 points. But note that small practices, non-patient facing clinicians, or if you're in a HPSA area or location, you're going to receive double weighting for those points. That means that those medium weight are now worth 20 points and the high weight are worth 40 points. So a small practice clinician can report on a single high weight improvement activity. They would earn those full 40 points and max out the points available for that category. They did modify a couple of the existing improvement activities that are listed there. They also removed one of the activities from last year as well. And while you can use the same improvement activities year after year, you want to review changes and especially whether a previously used activity is still valid for 2021. I also highly recommend, I cannot stress this enough, grab the data validation file, the link to which is on your screen right now, to get additional vital information on your chosen improvement activities, and most importantly, the CMS recommended audit documentation for that improvement activity. So as I said, it's sort of the honor system. You're not really giving data to CMS on these improvement activities. When you go to a test, you're just telling them that, hey, we did these 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 improvement activities throughout the year. If you get audited, CMS is going to ask you to prove that each one of your clinicians had that improvement activity implemented for at least 90 days in the calendar year. That data validation file gives you some clues as to what audit information you want to have in your file so that you are ready if you get audited up to several years from now. So you want to do that now this year so that 5 years from now, you're not scrambling to try and prove to CMS that you had that improvement activity. Grab that data validation file and it's going to give you a clue as to what you want to have in your audit file. Groups and virtual groups can attest to an improvement activity when at least 50% of the clinicians in the tax ID perform the same activity during any continuous 90-day period within that same performance year. So it doesn't have to be the same 90 days. It can be as long as each one of your clinicians, or at least 50% of your clinicians, had that improvement activity implemented for at least 90 days. PI category. So it is worth 25% of the MIPS final score. You do have to use the 2015 edition of your EHR. It has to be certified as such. It is performance-based scoring at the individual measure level. So we've got 4 objectives, but there are up to 7 measures within those 4 objectives. So we've got measures addressing e-prescribing, health information exchange, provider to patient exchange, and public health and clinical data exchange. To get the measure specifications and really understand what you need to accomplish with each one of those, grab that link at the bottom there, the 2021 Promoting Interoperability Measure Specifications, and we'll kind of unpack each one of those 7 measures for you. So the Query of Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, or PDMP measure, is still available as a bonus measure. So you don't have to report on that one. It's an optional yes-no measure. They did increase the bonus from 5 points last year to 10 points this year. So if you are using a PDMP, it does not have to be electronically connected to your EHR. So if you are using a PDMP website, let's say, before you prescribe narcotics to a patient, you could attest yes to that particular bonus measure and get those 10 points. They did change the name of the support electronic referral loops by receiving and incorporating health information, by replacing incorporating with reconciling, just really to really adjust the name to better reflect what it is you're doing in that measure. Along those same lines, they did give us a new optional health information exchange bidirectional measure that's worth the full 40 points. So you have a choice this year to either report on the 2 existing or previous HIE measures. One of them, they're measuring the rate at which you are sending your CCDAs or your summary of care documents to the specialist. Let's say if you're a PCP and you're referring out, you get credit for sending that data to the receiving clinician. And then you also get credit for incorporating or reconciling when you receive those CCDAs from patients coming to you. So you can either use each one of those, they're each worth 20 points each if you get perfect performance, or you can flip to this new bidirectional measure. It's reported by attestation, which means it's just a yes or no response. But if you say yes, note that you are saying yes to the following 3 statements. You want to be very careful if you do this, that you can actually prove that, that you met the requirements for that bidirectional measure. Not every system. There are, I think, a very few EHRs out there that really have this locked up and allow you to say yes to this new optional bidirectional measure instead of reporting on the 2 HIE measures. But I do know that there are some of you that are able to do that. And it takes a lot of burden off of your plate this year if you can flip to using that new bidirectional measure instead. We do have reweighting available again within the promoting interoperability performance category. There's an automatic reweighting and application-based reweighting. So the automatic reweighting, there's nothing you have to do to have this happen. If you are any one of those clinician types on the screen right there, and really it's everybody except the broad category of physician, CMS is not expecting PI data from you. So they do this automatic reweighting. If you do not report any PI data as one of those clinician types, CMS will automatically reweight your PI category down to 0, pushing that weight, that 25% weight, over to the quality category, making that worth 65% this year. You can override that automatic reweighting by submitting PI data anyway. Sometimes it makes sense to do that. If they receive PI data from you, they're going to score it accordingly. There's also application-based reweighting for certain circumstances, and it does the exact same thing. If you get approved for that application, it also reweights PI down to 0 and quality at 65%. One of the most common reasons to apply is that you are a small practice. So if you have 15 or fewer Medicare billing clinicians, you can apply to have PI reweighted down to 0. Note that this does not happen automatically. You do need to put in that application as a small practice, or you will get a big fat 0 as a PI performance score. The link to that application is at the bottom, but just note that the application is not yet available. Just like the EUC application, we'll likely see the application-based reweighting come available to us sometime around summer. And just like the EUC application, you'll have until the end of the year to get that in. Okay, let's talk about the 2021 performance threshold and payment adjustments. So we did see a change here as expected, where we went from 45 points for that minimum performance threshold up to 60 points for this year, but they did not change the exceptional performance bonus. So, and I'll talk about what that is in just a moment as well, but that remains at 85 points. So if you are at 85 points or above, you're going to receive some additional increase to that Medicare reimbursement rate. To ensure budget neutrality, positive MIPS payment adjustments get increased or decreased by an amount called a scaling factor. And the amount of the scaling factor depends on the distribution of final scores across all the participants. So here on this graphic, really what you have to keep in mind is that the negative adjustments, so people that are getting penalized for not scoring well enough in this program, are the ones that are paying for those positive adjustments. So they're the ones funding the increases for those that are doing better. You've got that minimum performance threshold of 60 points. So if you're below 60, you're going to see a decrease in your Medicare reimbursement rate. That decrease is what's funding the folks that are getting above that 60 points. And then here at 85 points, we get into the exceptional performance pool. CMS has allocated some additional funds that get away from that budget neutrality and fund these folks that are 85 points and above with some additional bonuses as well. So you definitely want to make sure you're at least in this range, and most definitely you want to shoot to get over 85 points this year if you can, so that you can, and really 100 is what you're really shooting for, because that's going to get you the best Medicare reimbursement rate possible. In terms of those, the different scores and kind of what that means, I've got that listed here. The performance threshold has incrementally increased each program year, and I think we'll continue to see that for perhaps the life of the program. For the 2022 program year, the performance threshold, which is the one in the green box there, is going to be based on the mean or median of the final scores for all MIPS eligible clinicians in previous year. So up to now, up to 2021, CMS has been able to decide what that performance threshold is going to be. It's written into the legislation that as of next year, that minimum performance threshold has to instead be based on the mean or median from a prior year. So this means that as of next year, the minimum performance threshold is going to be somewhere in the range of 70 to 85 points, because that's where we see the bulk of clinicians landing. That's kind of the average scores from year to year. So next year, participants are going to need to achieve scores that were previously considered exceptional performance in order to avoid a significant Medicare penalty. So that's why I state that you want to be shooting for that exceptional performance bucket now, knowing that if you fall short, you might not still get that penalty, because as of next year, you're going to have to do extraordinarily well in this program, or you're going to get hit with a penalty. All right, moving on. So that was really the MIPS track. We're going to now look at that other track, the alternative payment models track. APMs, it's sort of a generic term, describes this payment model in which providers are taking responsibility for cost and quality performance, and they receive payments to support the services and activities designed to achieve that high value. The most common type of an APM is an ACO, but there are several other types of APMs out there as well. The QPP doesn't change how any of those APMs pay for the medical care and reward value. Instead, they kind of add additional incentives on top of that contract. APM participants also participating in MIPS then receive favorable scoring under certain MIPS performance categories, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then some APMs are deemed advanced APMs or AAPMs. So we have APMs in general, we have MIPS APMs, and then a smaller subset are these advanced APMs. So we'll start at the bottom here. The vast majority of the APMs out there qualify as MIPS APMs. And so you get some favorable MIPS scoring, but those participants still have to participate in that MIPS track. That was that sort of extra middle track that I talked about on the very first slide here, where we've got the MIPS track, we've got the advanced APM track, but then we have this middle ground, which is where the MIPS APMs fall. At the very top of that pyramid, we've got the advanced APMs. These are the ones that have the greatest risks, but they also offer the greatest potential for reward. And really the overall goal of the QPP is to get folks to transition from the MIPS track into the advanced APMs. But unfortunately, it's not enough to just be a member of that advanced APM. You also have to be what's called a qualifying APM participant, or QP, in order to really realize the full benefits of being in that advanced APM. A qualifying APM is one that meets increasing thresholds for the percentage of charges from attributed beneficiaries that pass through the APM's payment methodology. An individual EC in a qualifying APM is a qualifying APM participant, or QP. If you hit that QP status, you are not required to report to MIPS. It's one of the big benefits of the advanced APM track. For Medicare Shared Savings ACOs, QP status is awarded to all of the advanced APM participants collectively, or to none, as the case may be. There are two different calculations that get used to try and qualify you as a QP. CMS uses whichever one is more favorable to you here. We have the payment amount method and the patient count method, and we also have those thresholds, which got locked into place at the end of last year and carry us through at least until 2023. We'll have to see where the rates fall there, but just note that QP status thresholds were going to increase significantly in 2021, where the first metric was going to jump all the way to 75 points, and the second one was going to jump to 50 points. But there was some emergency legislation that got passed through Congress in December of last year that stopped that increase from happening just due to the pandemic. So it was another one of the concessions that CMS made. They recognized that increasing that QP threshold during the pandemic was not in the best interests of folks. And so we have locked QP status thresholds in place with the 2020 levels for the next 2 years. So both 2021 and 2022, they'll remain at 50% and 35%. We'll have to see what happens in 2023 and if they'll jump up from there. You can also check your APM participation and whether you have QP status in the participation status lookup tool I have linked there. But just note that it's not reflected quite yet. CMS does 4 different checks or 3 different checks for QP status throughout the year. They have these kind of look back periods. We have crossed the barrier for that first one, which ended on March 31st. It's when CMS kind of pauses and looks at the participation lists for the various APMs, and they do this the calculations to see if the QP, if the participants in that ACO or other type of APM have hit that QP status. So this happens on March 31st, June 30th, and again on August 31st. But it takes a couple of months for them to post that data. So while you eventually will be able to see if you have QP status, the data from that first period is not quite posted yet. So it ended March 31st. Usually takes CMS a month or 2 to get that data posted, but we should have that that data by this summer. So what if the threshold for QP status is not met? So if QP status is not met, the advanced APM participants meeting slightly lower minimum thresholds, for instance, maybe instead of the 50%, it's 40%, are considered partially qualifying APM participants, or PQPs. If a PQP chooses to stay in the advanced APM track, meaning they do not report to MIPS at all, he or she will not receive the advanced APM bonus, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but they're also not subject to MIPS. So they don't have to submit any data, but then there are no financial adjustments that happen either. If the PQP chooses, he or she can report MIPS measures and participate in the MIPS incentive track. However, if you're not a QP nor a PQP, that participant is subject to the MIPS eligibility requirements, meaning CMS is going to look at your individual eligibility compared to that low volume threshold we talked about. So they're going to look at that eligibility, and if you are meeting or exceeding that low volume threshold, you are going to be forced to report to MIPS, and you're going to be scored in MIPS. You're treated just like a regular MIPS APM participant. So it's very important to work with your ACO. If you're in one of those ACOs, make sure you are talking to them about that QP status and making sure that you are doing everything in your power to ensure that you're going to hit that QP status this year, or it's sort of a moot point to be in that advanced APM. The incentives for being a QP are pretty significant. So you still have that model design within your advanced APM. So there's the shared savings, flexible payment bundles, other desirable features. None of that gets affected by the QPP. But for the next couple of years still, this year and next, you get, if you hit that QP status, the incentive is pretty significant. You get a 5% lump sum bonus that gets paid directly to your TIN. This does not go to the ACO for significantly participating in that advanced APM. So if you hit QP status in 2021, CMS is going to look at all of your claims, your Medicare Part B claims in 2022. And then in the fall of 2023, you are going to get a 5% lump sum bonus based on your 2022 Medicare billings. You're just going to get a huge check in the mail for an additional 5% lump sum bonus. You also get higher reimbursement updates. So right now, the Medicare fee schedule is kind of locked into place for several years while we transition into the QPP. Starting in 2026, it's going to start to increase. So your reimbursement rate will start to tick up again. But it's going to tick up at a higher rate if you're in one of these advanced APMs at 0.7%, 0.75% each year, versus 0.25% for the MIPS participants. So another reason to be in these advanced APMs. And then one of the best bonuses or incentives for being a QP in the advanced APM is you get to ignore the MIPS track completely. You don't have to, you're going to work with your ACO or work with that APM to meet the reporting requirements within the APM, but there's no additional MIPS requirements. So the advanced APMs then, that's those folks that are sort of bridging that gap between the MIPS track and the advanced APM track. the majority of Medicare ACOs still fall under that umbrella of the MIPS APMs. So the advanced APM benefits don't apply to these folks. They still have to participate in MIPS if you meet that low volume threshold to receive any favorable payment adjustments. The APM entity participates as a single large group with all the data gets aggregated to the APM level. And in that way, all of the MIPS APM participants receive the same MIPS final score based off their ACO score. And everybody gets that same payment adjustment relative to that score. You don't qualify for that 5% advanced APM bonus payment we just talked about. And you're also not eligible for those higher baseline annual updates beginning in 2022, or I'm sorry, 2026. But there's a lot of great benefits to being those advanced APMs. One of the best ones I see is that strength in numbers. We see these APM entities, these ACOs that are MIPS APMs, doing extraordinarily well because of that strength in numbers component. So we see them performing exceptionally well in the quality category. So that's one of the great benefits. You also receive full credit automatically for the improvement activities performance category if you are one of these MIPS APM participants, as cost is already assessed under that ACO's methodology or that APM methodology. No additional MIPS cost category score is generated. They just fall back on the ACO's or the APM's cost category score. You get all of the specific rewards that are built into that APM, and then you are still eligible for the MIPS bonuses, which continue indefinitely. So if you continue to do really well in that MIPS track, you're going to continue to see that Medicare reimbursement rate get increased or be better than just the base rate versus the 5% advanced APM bonus, which right now is expected to go through next year. I have heard talk that there is talk of potentially extending that beyond the first 6 years of the program. But as of right now, the legislation would have that 5% lump sum bonus ending after the 2022 year, but on the MIPS track, those continue indefinitely. We do also have this new option available to us this year. CMS has introduced us to this concept of the APM Performance Pathway, or APP. It is a new way to participate in the program. It's complementary to the MVPs, which doesn't mean much because we haven't seen those yet. There's another change that's coming to us, but due to the pandemic, they delayed implementation of these MIPS value pathways. But just note that there's some significant changes coming in future years, bringing in this concept of MIPS value pathways. The APP is one of those MVPs, or MIPS value pathways. It's available to all the MIPS APM participants, and it really kind of opens things up a little bit. It gives you some significantly different options to participate in that MIPS APM that could be very, very beneficial to you. It is required, the APP is required for all MSSP ACOs this year. So just note that your MSSP ACO, if you are a member, does have to conform to this new APM performance pathway. But it allows all MIPS eligible clinicians, including those in the MIPS APM then, to participate in MIPS as an individual clinician at the group level or at the APM level. So being in a MIPS APM, but still being able to also participate at the individual or group level, kind of outside or in addition to, is probably the better way to state it, to the APM or to the ACO, are new options for you this year. The category weights shift a little bit, just like we saw in previous years. Although it's called it all falls under the APP now. But if you're scored under the APP, quality is worth 50%, cost is 0, PI is worth 30%, and IA is worth 20%. So the biggest change under the APP is that it significantly alters the way you are reporting quality. It significantly reduces the number of measures that the ACO or the APM is required to report. So the caps for ACOs is being eliminated, and it's being replaced with caps for MIPS. So now if you're participating in the APP, you have to do the caps survey at the TIN level. It's no longer the ACO level. Each TIN or tax ID within that ACO now has to, they're kind of on their own somewhat to get the CAPS for MIPS survey done. There are 3 clinical quality measures to calculate and submit. That's the diabetes hemoglobin A1C measure, the preventative care and screening for depression and follow-up plan, and the controlling high blood pressure measure. So those are the only kind of typical or traditional quality measures that get reported here. Then we have that CAPS for MIPS survey, as I mentioned, and then 2 administrative claims measures that I have listed there as well. So MSSP ACO impacts. The MSSP ACOs are required to use the APP this year, but CMS did give an additional concession because of COVID. Again, they're not forcing them to report on those measures we just talked about. They can opt to use the old measures that let's say that they did last year through the CMS web interface for 1 more year. And then as of now anyway, they would be forced to use the true APP, the new and improved APP method come next year. But they do have that option to fall back on the old measures and the old ways for 1 additional year due to COVID. It significantly reduces the number of ACO quality measures. It goes from a huge number of 23 measures down to just a measly 6. And the number of measures the ACO is required to actively report is reduced from 10 down to just those 3 that we talked about. And then we have those enhanced MIPS reporting options, meaning you can still kind of step outside of your ACO and report in addition to the ACO as well. Another change they made is they have now, as of 2020, they have opened up the EUC application to the ACOs. So the ACO could apply for that EUC due to COVID, let's say, for example, starting last year, and it's available this year as well. So as one of those MSSP ACO participants, you have options available this year that you have not had in previous years that could be very beneficial to you. You could use the ACO MIPS score that will be calculated using the APP quality submission of your ACO, and then the PI it's a weighted average across all the TINs that are participating in an ACO, and you get automatic full credit for the improvement activities. That could change next year, so don't always count on getting that full credit. Each year they build it into the legislation or into the final rule each year, whether or not they're going to continue to give full credit for improvement activities. That won't always be the case, I suspect. But now you can also submit traditional MIPS on your own outside of the ACO. So you're still going to have to work with your ACO to do the quality reporting through them, and you're still going to get that ACO score that's going to be applied to you. But you have the option now to report additionally outside of your ACO at the group or individual level and be treated like a typical MIPS clinician. And then if you do that, CMS is going to award the higher of those 2 MIPS scores to you. So you wouldn't necessarily get the ACO score if your own data outperforms the ACO. So that is a great option for you as well. A few questions to be answered, I think, this year, especially as we roll into next year when we don't have that option to fall back on the old CMS web interface measures. For the MSSP reporting at the ACO level, how will clinical quality measure data be collected and calculated? I think there's a big issue here with the 3 quality measures that the ACO needs to report on come next year, because they are either ECQMs, meaning they're being reported through the EHR, or they're MIPS CQMs if you're working through a registry. But the ACO is still going to have to figure out how to aggregate that data. I understand CMS recognizes that is a huge challenge to aggregate data, and I hear there are potentially some additional guidance coming that we should have sometime this year in time to kind of get our legs under us for next year. Should the ACOs have the groups and TINs submit APP directly? Again, that gets at some of that data aggregation. That's going to be a significant hurdle to overcome. Will the ACO organize a CAPS for MIPS option at the group level? So each of those groups or TINs within the ACO is right now sort of on their own to get the CAPS for MIPS survey done. But I think the ACOs should be able to work with those survey vendors that are available and maybe get some sort of group pricing to kind of help out their ACO members. which individuals, groups, or TINs should also submit traditional MIPS on their own because they can achieve that higher score and higher incentive outside of the ACO score. And in that same vein, then, will some of those ACO participants want to submit traditional MIPS on their own so they can control their own fate and not necessarily be locked into that group score? Okay, well, that's really it for the content. I have a couple of other things to get to here. One is just to talk to about the free technical assistance available to you. So you're not on your own in this program. CMS continues to fund us and a lot of organizations like us across the country to be out there helping you and ensuring that you've got everything you need to do well. CMS really wants you to do well in this program, which is why they're funding organizations such as Altarum and all of our program partners to be out there assisting you. You would access that free, again, it's free for small practices. That free help can be, you can access that through that website at the bottom, qppresourcecenter.org. If you're not already linked up with us, and we have thousands of clinicians that are, you want to click the Join Now button and start to interface with us. It's going to give you a wealth of information. It gives you a team of awesome colleagues of mine who are really well versed in this program as well. And you can hammer them with every question you can think of, and they're going to be able to help guide you through the program. One of the other fantastic benefits that being a small practice with that free access gives you is the access to MIPScast. So within the QPP Resource Center, we have developed something called MIPScast, which I think is worth its weight in gold. It is a proprietary MIPS scoring tool. So we know how CMS is going to score your data. We've built a tool to give you some insight into what your data means. You can feed your data into MIPScast. Think of it as sort of a sandbox that you can work with throughout the year. You can keep giving us data, and we're going to keep giving you an indication of what that data would score if you gave that same data set to CMS. It allows you to change your data. You can see what it looks like at the individual level, at the group level, submit that data throughout the year, figure out which data set gives you the best possible score, and then when the data submission opens up, you can either have MIPScast report it for you. MIPScast is a qualified registry, meaning we can shepherd that data to CMS on your behalf, or you can just choose to do it on your own. You don't have to take advantage of the ability for MIPScast to report for you, but a lot of you are doing that from year to year. So I think this is a fantastic tool. That alone is worth working with us, getting access to that MIPScast. Again, it is completely free for the small practices. There is a small fee that you'd have to pay for the large practices, but any of the small practices get that access to our resources, to what we call the QPAs, or Quality Payment Plan Advisors, which are my colleagues that are very knowledgeable, and it gives you MIPScast. So I highly recommend that you work with us, because I guarantee we can be a great resource for you, and we really love to help you. It is our jobs to be out there kind of making sure you have everything you need and you're doing well in this program. So, all right, with that, we have a couple minutes left. I've seen some questions come in, which let me get through them and see what we have for questions. You've got my contact information here. I love getting questions. I love helping you guys. So don't ever feel like you're peppering me with too many questions. That's impossible to do. It's what I'm here for. So if I can help you in any way, certainly reach out to me. You've got my number there, my email. Definitely work with us through the QPP Resource Center as well. I know you won't be disappointed, especially once you start to access MIPScast and have it process your data for you. All right, let's look at these questions. It is my understanding that you cannot submit quality data from 2 EHRs in one TIN. For example, 56% visits in one EHR and 44% visits in another EHR without the use of a registry. Is that correct information? Yes. Well, there's a couple of options. Really, what you need to do is aggregate that data. So if you're in a single tax ID, but you're on 2 different EHRs, you're right, you can't submit 2 data sets from those EHRs. You have to submit that as a single data set. You could do that by working with a registry who is able to interface or get the data from both EHRs, aggregate it for you, and then perhaps submit it on your behalf. There are also some data aggregation vendors out there. but I understand they can be fairly expensive to work with to aggregate your data, but they would also be able to take the data from both EHRs and give it back to you, perhaps as a single data file. I am a small practice that meets some but not all of the criteria that mandates inclusion in MIPS. If I do not opt in and do not perform and bill any of the quality measures in my daily Medicare billings, will I suffer any type of penalty? No. So you're in a small practice. You are, you're falling short on all three elements of that low volume threshold. That means you are not, you're not required to participate in MIPS. So you don't have to opt in. You don't have to voluntarily report. You don't have to do anything. And there will not be any penalty whatsoever. He's asking the same question differently. Is it true that the only way to suffer a penalty is to opt into MIPS but have poor performance in one or all three of the areas? That's true. Don't ever opt in if you can't generate a MIPS final score that is above that minimum performance threshold, which again is 60 points. So if you're getting 55 points and that's the best score you can offer CMS, definitely don't opt in, because you'd be opting in to take a penalty. Don't do that. Someone came in late and is asking if there will be a hardship for extreme and uncontrollable circumstances this year. A small practice, rural, underserved. Yes. So Gary, that is true. There is a slide earlier on that you probably missed as you joined late, which is okay. But the EUC application will be available. We'll see it come live probably around summertime. And the same options that we had for 2020 EUC are the same for 2021, including taking a pass on 1, 2, 3, or all 4 performance categories. That's your choice if you are experiencing significant hardship due to the pandemic. Can you please review why we should avoid topped out and capped measures? So it's really about that performance. Unless you are scoring absolute perfection, you are getting 100% performance on the topped out measure, you are going to take sort of a hit in points, because we talked about how that topped out measure, you can still get the 10 points for perfect performance, but it's really hard to get perfect performance on these measures. And so by not getting, you could be near perfection and getting 99.99% performance on a quality measure, but if it's one of the topped out measures, you might only earn 3 points for that near perfection. And so by using a lot of topped out measures but not hitting perfect performance, you're going to take a significant hit in your quality category score. It's even worse for the capped measures, meaning that perfect performance. So even if you are still getting that perfect performance at 100% on that measure, you're not going to get 10 points because now it's been capped at 7. So again, avoiding those topped out measures is good practice, but again, it's getting harder and harder to do so, and very few folks can avoid topped out measures completely. But any topped out measures you can avoid using is a good idea, unless of course you're getting perfect performance, and then go for it, because you're still going to get those 10 points. Will the PowerPoint be available after the webinar? Absolutely. You can download it right now in the handout section of your GoToWebinar interface. We will also be posting these in the coming days to the QPPResourceCenter.org website. A couple last questions. I know a couple minutes over. I appreciate any of folks that have stayed with me here. I am an optometrist. My diabetic patients often do not know their A1C score and do not order blood work. How can I meet the performance threshold for documenting A1C? That's a tough one. That's where being in these specialties can be really, really difficult. It's not really a clinically relevant measure for you as an optometrist. You're not treating their diabetes. You're not managing their diabetes necessarily, and so it becomes difficult to use some of these scores, because if you're not treating it, or if you're not ordering those tests, you're going to have a hard time getting at the data you need to do well in that particular measure. So as an optometrist, you might need to be looking at some of the other measures instead, and finding ones that are more clinically relevant, or at the very least ones that you're in control of the data, or you're in control of the workflow that is needed to be able to do well in those measures. What if only measures available to you are mainly topped out? And yeah, that happens under radiology, as Billy said here. You know, I caution you to avoid them if you can, but I am certain a lot of you cannot avoid them, especially as we get more and more topped out measures. This is happening year after year. You all are doing a fantastic job. You're all improving on your quality year to year. So you're getting better and better, which is awesome. But the flip side of that is it creates more and more topped out measures, because we start to see the range of scores get smaller and smaller and smaller between the highest and lowest performers. So if you can avoid them, do it. If you can't, then you're stuck with reporting on those topped out measures, but then you want to be working really, really hard to get perfect performance. Otherwise, you're going to take a pretty significant hit on your quality category score. All right, folks, we are out of time and then some, as usual. I apologize for keeping you for a couple extra minutes. Again, if you have any additional questions for me, please don't hesitate to reach out to my team through the QPP Resource Center. They are awesome. And you can feel free to hit me up directly as well. As long as your question is getting answered, we are happy. So pepper us with questions. We love to help you. With that, I thank you for joining us today. I will be repeating this version, or maybe a version very similar to this, throughout the year, each month. We will also be posting a recording of this webinar on our website, the qppresourcecenter.org. And I look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.